Well, there's a very big global rethink going on about energy, and in particular, energy independence. Germany and Italy waking up to the fact that they are totally dependent on Russia, and they're both going to start mining coal. Goodness gracious me, Greta Thunberg, she really must be crying and shouting at the moment. And yet, if you think about it, she did more than anybody to make us dependent upon Russia. Boris Johnson, well, what a change, what a difference a week makes. We now hear strong rumours that the two wells up in the northwest of England, drilled by Quadrilla to extract shale gas, that actually they're not now likely to be concreted over, I'm pleased to say. And the Prime Minister today in the House of Commons announcing a new energy independence plan. I could hardly believe my ears. Now, he did emphasise we want to phase out hydrocarbons. All of this left me ever so slightly scratching my head. And then he did it. He came out pro-nuclear, said the Labour Party had not invested enough in new nuclear plants, accused the Labour Party of being anti-nuclear. Well, actually, Starmer then stood up and said the Labour Party is in favour of nuclear power. All I can say is, given where we were a week ago as a country on this, there's been a big political change, and I'm delighted to see that, and I've been pushing hard for a complete rethink and an open public debate. So, the question for you tonight to answer to me, is nuclear the key to our energy independence? Farage at GBNews.uk. Now, in the gallery today was Darren McCaffrey, GBNews' political editor. Darren, you bore witness to all of this.
Yeah, indeed, and it is fascinating, as you say, this massive change, but this is part of a whole series of changes that we've seen here in the West to what is happening. Nuclear energy, I think it's about a fifth of Britain's energy comes from nuclear energy. The problem is that most of our nuclear reactors are due to shut down in the next decade or so. We're talking about places like Hinkley Point that may well come on stream. But again, that is many years down the line. Also notable, Rolls-Royce has been given the go-ahead to properly invest and to research these kind of mini nuclear plants they're talking about. But again, they're not going to come on stream until the 2030s at the earliest. But there is now a determination on the government's behalf to try and come up with a new strategy to ensure that Britain is energy independent, essentially, from the rest of Europe. Whether that involves North Sea resources, potentially fracking, who knows? But this is what the Prime Minister had to say in the Commons a little earlier.
I will be setting out an energy independence plan for this country, Mr. Speaker, in the course of the next few days to ensure that we undo some of the damage of previous decisions taken, not least by the Labour government, to invest in not to invest in nuclear, Mr. Speaker, and so that we prepare our people for the long term and with sustainable, cost-efficient energy supply.
The long term, indeed. Everyone recognises that. The problem, of course, is it is the long term. Interestingly, and you picked up on this as well, he seemed to try and attack the Labour Party at several points today about abandoning...
Yes. Now, I thought they left power a few years ago.
Well, this is... I think sometimes the Prime Minister forgets the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years, under which time they could have done that. And you're right, though, it did provoke a reaction from Keir Starmer, insisting that, largely, actually, they're on board with all of this.
Labour is pro-nuclear. This Prime Minister can't get a single brick laid of a new nuclear plant. Energy security isn't just about supply, it's also about reducing demand.
Aren't politicians wonderful? Energy security, being self-sufficient. When I was writing articles about it in Sunday newspapers last week, I mean, it was as if, I might as well have come from Mars. The concept was so foreign, and now they're all talking about it. The problem is, even if we start to develop onshore gas, that's a year. And that's the quickest new source of energy. North Sea exploration with prices where they are. So much more of the North Sea becomes viable. But again, that's several years. Nuclear...
decades, potentially.
Well, maybe not quite as bad as that.
At least a decade, possibly, yeah.
Isn't the problem, Darren, there is a short-term emergency?
This is the big problem the government immediately faces. The Prime Minister considered a long-term independent energy supply strategy, and he will, that may be fine. The problem is what's going to happen in the coming weeks and months. We are seeing potentially petrol prices hit the pumps £2 this year. We're going to see energy prices not go up by hundreds of pounds, potentially thousands of pounds, depending on what happens. All this while inflation is now expected to hit at least 8%. And on top of that, the government's going to impose tax rises, substantial tax rises in the form of a national insurance increase and changing the boundaries on the income tax threshold. That means a lot more people will be paying essentially the top rate of tax. You add all that in, that means an enormous squeeze on people's standard of living. Some might suggest, and David Cameron, Boris Johnson's predecessor, has been on the radio tonight, saying an unsustainable squeeze on people's living standards. Something is going to have to give here. We saw the Irish, for example, today immediately announce that they're going to slash the tax on petrol and diesel from midnight tonight until August by 20 cents and 15 cents respectively. The government, I think, are going to have to come up with something, I'm pretty sharpish, to deal with all of this. Are they going to drop those tax increases? Politically, I would have thought they would. The Chancellor, though, is holding resolute, but in the end, it'll have to be Boris Johnson's decision.
And of course, on fuel, there's a big increase in duty coming for red diesel. Red diesel used by everybody in the construction industry, people out there making roads, a lot of people out there doing deliveries. 38% increase in tax on red diesel.
And it is fascinating in that, again, as always with these things, with the green agenda, and the government's not going to claim it's abandoning this, but there is a recognition that in the short term, these targets of carbon neutral by 2050, we're still a long way from 2050. In the short term, decisions like, for example, on red diesel, or indeed, and a government, I don't think they've stopped the escalator, but they've not deliberately cut, for example, fuel duty for a very long period of time, that has to now be on the table given the circumstance we're in, given also that the British government are now committed to phasing out, aren't they, Russian oil by the end of this year.
And all of it from a government who had to massively increase public borrowing, massively increase the national debt during coronavirus.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that's the one point the Conservative Party make, is that, we can have it every which way. I'm sure that's what the Chancellor would say right now, is if you want a better public health care system, if you want more NHS spending, it has to come through taxation. It cannot simply come through borrowing anymore, given the size of the national debt. And also that we cannot keep insisting that we're constantly in a crisis. And that may well be true, but the whole point is we are in a crisis, and we're in a crisis that is hitting people in the back pockets. And it is one that, if the Conservative Party get wrong, could be very, very difficult for them at the end.
It's going to be a very big budget in 2 weeks' time. Darren, as ever, thank you very much indeed. So nuclear, there we are. I haven't heard a positive word really said about nuclear at the dispatch box like that for, it must be, years and years and years.